You mean to mute myself?
You can, as long as maybe yes, yeah, just in case. So because you know how sometimes like the recording can kind of keep popping back and forth. That's not a big deal. Um, you know how this goes, so I'll just rant, do my little thing. At any point, just if I'm not making sense, like please stop me, put your hand up, hop into the chat, bring yourself off mute, and we can kind of clarify things. But basically what I've kind of been working around and synthesizing is this idea of like coming from chaos, right? Or like some of these emotional states or nervous system dysregulation, and then what it looks like and what it feels like as we shift into coherence. So, coherence that we're talking about is the physiologic coherence. So, when we look at respiration, right, so our breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and um, the nervous system, right, we detect like these very significant changes that indicate coherence, and then the associated hormonal system, emotional states that go along with that experience. And it usually just feels better. Our decision making improves. Our just overall experience is usually better once we shift into this state of coherence. So, where we should start is around this idea of that our beliefs shape our biology. So there's a lot of evidence and research now that that just kind of illustrates this point, right? If we, so a couple examples, like if we tell someone that like this injection is going to hurt, and then we tell the other group that it's going to be painless, right? What we see is that not only will they, generally relate that, yes, it was a more painful experience, but we'll also see changes in like hormones and things of that nature. And then we also see that in like the nutrition space too, right? So we hand someone this protein shake and we tell them that, or we tell the one group that it's full of, protein, like good carbohydrates, and it's going to be a really good shake for weight loss. And then we tell the other group like, oh, it's high in these things and it's going to provide, more of like a weight gain effect. Even though it's the same thing, it's like just that belief with drinking it is going to shape the way that the hormones change, our endocrine system kind of follows suit, nervous system, and so forth. Um, Another one that comes to mind is when we tell people that their job is giving them the sufficient amount of, minimum dose of weekly exercise, right? They'll perceive their job differently, and so then we see this like cascade of effects of the the muscle gain and weight loss versus someone where like, oh, that's not exercise. You need to still go and like do extra stuff. So, their daily and weekly tasks really don't change, but what we do see is a shift in a lot of these blood markers and nervous system state, right? So what we then see is like the belief and our attention really starts to shape our physiologic experience. And so, um, where our attention goes, energy flows. And so, we can also think about this through the lens of like pain, right? So, if someone comes into the physical therapy clinic and they're like, I'm like, hey, how's your week going? They're like, oh, my shoulder's kind of been hurting like all week. And right, so they kind of jump to that. But then we can ask them like, well, how's your knee doing? Like, oh, well, that's fine. Hands and wrists, those are good. Do you have a headache? No. And so it could be the case that 99% of their body feels good, but the 1% is kind of pulling their attention. And because the attention goes to the shoulder, that shapes their entire experience, right? I had a bad week because my shoulder pain was like kind of this way, right? So if instead we start to bring our attention to some of these other areas, it's going to really color our overall experience. So if they were kind of feeling into like, oh, all these areas that actually feel really nice, they would probably respond to that question a little bit differently, right? How was your week? It's like, oh, well, it's mostly good, but I do still have a little bit of shoulder pain. Now I get that the context in the PT space is like, well, that's what they're coming in for, and we're going to focus on that and so forth. But even just as a general question, we start to see these themes go into a bunch of other spaces, right? Where it's not just about like what we feel in the body, but also like things that kind of linger within our mind, things that we worry about, right? Where it's just like I continue to focus on this particular aspect or this problem, either past, future, whatever. Um, when actually, like the large majority, 99% of my life is pretty darn good, right? Um, so, so what we're really talking about here and getting into is this, again, the heart-brain connection, heart-brain connection. So for all intents and purposes, when we talk about like mind and body, we're just going to think about the heart today, right? So for all intents and purposes, heart's going to be the biggest kind of driver or biggest connection with the brain. And so when we were, I was first told in physiology that like the heart is this mechanical pump, right? And we kind of left it at that. And that was just our understanding for a long, long time that we just thought it was like, okay, well, it pumps the blood to a bunch of different, all areas of the body. But the heart also plays other roles, right? So one really like more obvious one is this electromagnetic field that it produces. So when I first started getting into this, I thought it was, it was like, oh, it's like a little woo woo. But like, let's just even look at it from like the physics side. So when you go to the cardiologist, right, your heart doctor, or um, they can put electrodes up to your chest, and they can run the EKG, right? And then we start to see these waveforms of the heart pumping. What we also know is we have technology now where we can detect that electromagnetic field. As far as we can tell, it's like 10 to 15 feet outside of the body, right? So if we imagine like 15 feet radius in each direction, that might take up the majority of, like, the car that you're sat in or my kitchen. It's like it actually really, it's most of this room. When we can compare that with the brain, the brain is only about like 3 feet off of the skull, or maybe they measure it kind of from the center of the head. So all that to say is that this electromagnetic field is larger and it's more powerful than the brain. Yeah. We also know that the heart is part of the endocrine system, so it's producing oxytocin now. So it's like has this like endocrine aspect to it as well. And so now we're beginning to recognize, or it is recognized as its own like in-house circuitry system, like it's its own ecosystem, right? It's a mini one, compared to the brain, but it's like this little system that kind of has its own inner workings, and then it's communicating to the brain all of the time, right? It's constantly sending signals back and forth. And if we do want to quantify, the heart's sending more signals to the brain than the brain is sending to the heart. So this kind of bottom up experience is a really important one to keep in mind because when we get into mental states of like I am feeling chaos, right? I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling worried. It's going to be really hard to just be like I am calm, right? So if we kind of use like these sayings, if if we tried to like use that as a mantra, it's like it's gonna be really tough to overcome that if your heart is racing, right? There's gonna be a lot of like, headbutting between the head and the heart. So what's going to be really useful here is less of this like just saying I am calm, I am calm, I am calm, but addressing it at the heart level, right? So um when we think about like uh kind of tying it back into like emotional states, we know that some emotional states kind of give us energy and then some kind of like deplete us. So oftentimes we don't have to like look too far into our past even. Like maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was a week ago where we had a day where we felt off. And in on the day that you felt off, if it was anger, frustration, worry, whatever it might be, it's like how much energy did you have at the end of the day? Right? Versus if we're curious and excited and full of joy, right? There's we're not talking about like calories like type of energy, but just more of like the energetic energy. And one of my favorite examples of this is like when we look at, sports. I use sports a lot because there's just like so many cool things we can pull from it. But, whether you're a sports buff or not, we can think about like, it's the finals, end of the tournament, overtime of whatever sport, football, basketball, etc. And so up until the end of the game, if it's close, like both sides are kind of matched in their energetic state, right? But as soon as the whistle blows, timer runs out, game's over. One team is just like fired up, right? They have a ton of energy, arguably more than they had just a moment ago, right? And the other team is just like dead, right? They want to lie down, right? They just want to put their head down, walk to the locker room. Their energy state just shifted. So it's like, where did that come from, right? So really what we're thinking about is like our ability to tap into these emotional states that give us energy versus take some away. And what we don't want to say is that like we won't vilify like bad emotions, right? Things that we kind of deem bad, right? Mother Nature didn't necessarily do us a disservice. Like that's still an important aspect of our experience. Like that's not a dysfunction in the code, right? So those still have their utility, but if our desire is to spend more and more time in these more uplifting emotions, it's like, well, how do we get to that place? Because we know that it's going to be very difficult for us to do that. Like, oh, I'm full of joy, just or I'm calm, I'm whatever these things. We know this to be true because if all we had to do was say I am this or that, say it once, say it 10 times, and then you inhabited that emotional state, it's like we wouldn't be here. Like we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? Everyone would be having the time of their life, right? If it was that easy. So it's like, well, what are we missing here? It's like, well, I believe that this whole brain heart connection is kind of the missing link here. So if we just get the heart, again, the body to register the emotion that we're looking for, it's like, well, then we can have a better access to these emotions. And um, so basically, we can kind of use this three-step process. So this three-step process first begins by shifting our attention, right? Like we talked about, where our attention goes, energy flows. I think that's attributed to Tony Robbins, right? So if awareness is this like kind of like diffuse thing, it's like a lantern, kind of soft light that kind of expands into all these aspects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and the internal sensory experience, right? It's just like all of this stuff kind of loosely. Our attention is more of like the focus that we place on a particular spot, right? It's a little bit more of that like spotlight, okay? And so, back to the guy with the shoulder issue. I was like, well, how's your opposite hand feeling? And so when we start to place our attention on the hand, we can't give as much energy to the shoulder, right? Attention energy. So it's a finite resource. And arguably our attention is like it's maybe the most valuable resource that we have, right? We're in an attention economy now, right? It's even kind of become pervasive into just like the time and space that we're living in. So our attention is going to be really important and it can become, we can really think about it as this like really powerful tool that we have as well. Giving attention to our attention. It's a little bit meta, right? So once we recognize that like, okay, I'm feeling a certain way, I've been giving my attention to something that I don't necessarily want to, that becomes the opportunity to then go through these three steps. So what we can start with is just starting to shift our attention around. So let's go ahead and if you're open to it, let's just kind of practice it. Do you have any questions about anything so far? Okay. Yeah, cool. So yeah, let's go ahead and we'll basically just like go through these three steps together. I think it'll be kind of cool. So all we're gonna do is just start to shift our attention around. I invite you to just kind of settle in and then let your eyes flutter close. And just start with bringing your attention to the spot right behind your eyes. So it's just the spot right behind your eyes. And then you know where you're at. See if you can bring your attention to the space like just in front of your eyes. Like you can kind of imagine what's happening out there. Good. And then bring it back behind the eyes. Then we'll go all the way down into, feel your toes. Your toes on both feet. And then maybe you can feel like the bottom of your feet as well. Maybe they're in contact with the floor. And then let's come up to the hips, right? Front of the hips, back of the hips, the sides, a pretty big joint. So there's a lot to explore there. Okay. Start to check in with like the gut, right? So there's a lot there as well because that includes like, the low back. If we've been sitting for a long time, usually the low back starts to get a little stiff. You can feel into the front of your abdomen as well. And then start to come up to the chest. If we're really quiet, sometimes we can feel our pulse somewhere. Maybe it's in the chest. Sometimes we feel it in the gut. Maybe we feel pulsing in our head. Yeah. And then feel your throat. So it's throat and neck, right? If we've been sitting for a long time as well, that can put a lot of specific forces on the neck. And then start to make your way up to the crown of the head. Whether we're like wearing a hat or we got our glasses on top of our head, maybe you can kind of feel your hair and scalp. Maybe there's a little bit of tension there with like the fascia. And then begin to sense if you can detect just above the top of your head. Cool. And then we'll start to come back, just kind of wiggle the fingers and toes, blink the eyes open, remember where you're at. Yeah. Well, so that's step number one, right? The process doesn't have to be that long But if we do spend that much amount of time, there's a pretty good chance that like we can't think about those areas and think about what's for dinner. And we can't worry about the embarrassing thing that I did last week in front of all my friends, right? So if we're focusing on this area, it tells our nervous system that, hey, things are safe. There's probably not a tiger lurking in the bush. Yeah. So that's step number one, right? We didn't have to do anything fancy, but it brings us out of our head and into our body and, again, into our heart. The second thing that we like to do is tap into our coherence breathing, right? Again, like this really powerful physiologic state. It's like we might not be there yet, right? We might instead just be not this other thing, which was like in our head, right? So coherence breathing is at its foundation, it's just breathing deep and slow. And it tends to be around 5 to 6 seconds on both the inhale and on the exhale. So for a lot of people, it's like 5.5 is like the average. That's kind of tough to count. We can use apps to help us with that. So we can like really kind of feel into like, well, what is it like? Have it guided for us. What can be really nice in the moment if we don't have, if we don't have that available to us, probably a 5 second count. And then just and then you just start to slow the pace, a 5 count in, 5 count out, and then you just slowly lengthen it, right? Using the same count. What's also really nice is if we can tap into our heart rate, if we can feel that either by, grabbing hold of our pulse, that's one option. But oftentimes if we're in a quiet enough area, oftentimes we can start to feel our pulse, right? Things settle down. It's always there, but it's just really subtle. And as you continue to breathe 5 in, 5 out, your heart rate is going to slow, right? And then we can just use that as our pacer, right? Now you're allowed to kind of lengthen and shorten, but around 5 and 5 is like a really good place. Like that's kind of a nice rule of thumb, rule of thumb there. So for most people, that will get them into coherence rather fast, like in an order of like 3, maybe 5 minutes. Sometimes 10 if you're coming from a place of like a lot of stress. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, after you've done step two, again, maybe like 3 to 5 minutes of that, now we can start to bring back in our preferred emotional state. So we can start to self-generate emotions. It's like, well, how do we do that? The way that we start to do that is like, well, because you've had these emotions in the past before, now we get to use the power of the mind to influence the heart, right? So remember, coherence is actually this synchronization of both the brain and heart. So now they're like talking and the waves are lining up. So now that we have that, as we begin to change the brain wave to one of joy, one of gratitude, one of curiosity, now the heart's going to listen a little better. It's going to like coincide a little bit easier. So now we just begin to tap into memories of joy, right? When did I experience joy before? When did I experience gratitude before? Maybe I can experience gratitude right now. I'm thankful for clean water that I'm drinking, right? I'm thankful for like, oh, I got these clothes, or look how cool my watch is. Yeah, whatever it might be, right? There's a lot to be grateful for. That's why I like that one. It's a pretty high vibration, and it's readily available. Um, so joy is a little bit tougher, I think, for people to tap into, but it's worth practicing. It's a good one to, still try with this process. Um, Now, usually when people start this practice, it is going to take a little bit of time, right? like maybe you're looking at like 10 to 15 minutes to go through this process. And again, it depends on where you're coming from. If you're in a lot of stress, anxiety, worry, depression, whatever it might be, it's going to take a little bit of time to tap into. But ideally, we just practice this before those situations happen. So then when we do really need this practice, we can get there a little bit faster. It's just like any skill, right? Um, so let's see, is there anything else? Yeah, I think that covers it. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions about that coming to the top of mind?
No, no questions coming up. All of it made sense. You explained it really well. And it makes sense building off of all the other things we've talked about in the past, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, there was another stat that I was going to mention. So this one came out of Harvard like a little over a year ago, but they found that like the emotion of loneliness
Hmm.
is worse for your health than smoking a pack of cigarettes per day.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, and and what I think that kind of points to, we've talked around this a little bit, I believe, in the past, but like, the emotion of loneliness, right? So loneliness can, on one level, be lack of connection, and tied in with that is like lack of safety, right? So our hardware, software, as a human, like our ancestors were in tribes, and if we got kicked out of the tribe, it's like you're probably not going to make it, right? As humans, we're not really
Yeah.
sufficient on our own if we have to forage and create our own shelter and defend against the bears and wolves and Ebola and all of these
Ebola.
things.
Yeah.
So, if we look at our own lives, like, yeah, it's like I can't do my own dentistry work. I can brush my teeth, but I can't do my own dentistry work. Can I service my car? It's like, yeah, I can do some things. Can I build my own house? Like, never done it, don't know, probably not. Right? So there's
Yeah.
all of these things where we're so reliant on other people. Um, and that's kind of our foundation. So like when we feel disconnected, right, there's like a huge safety component, and safety still is at the foundation of our emotional state. Like if you don't feel safe, like it's really tough to feel curious and joy, right? So we kind of have to get into this space where safety becomes our foundation. What's kind of cool is, even with this practice, like we just start to feel more safe in our body, right? So yes, physical safety, but also like the internal felt state, like what does safety feel like in the body? Because oftentimes it's kind of our body is sending these signals of it's not safe, but then again in our heads we're like, I'm safe. Like I'm looking around like things are okay. But my heart's racing and my breathing rate's up. Like, well, what's that all about? So oftentimes, it's that same process that we talked about, right? Where we start to hedge even something like loneliness, right? It's like, yeah, still get out there, or like do the thing that a connected person would do, right? It's like we have gatherings, we reach out to people, we say hello to strangers as we walk by, we smile at, maybe we small talk with the person the cashier at the grocery store, right? It's like that's what a connected person would do. Um, it's hard to do that if you don't feel safe. If you're already not feeling connected, right? It's just like tougher when we're like the opposite, which could be feeling stressed out, disconnected, all these other things. We just know that our decision making like kind of takes a dip. I think everybody's had that experience, right? We can say that. I think I can say that pretty confidently. Um, yeah, like so. Yeah, it's akin to smoking, which we have a lot of data on, right? If you smoke a pack a day, It's like, yeah, health span, lifespan takes a predictable dip. So yeah, it points to our connectedness, but also safety, how that's like foundational. When people aren't feeling safe in their bodies, right, they have to ramp up into more of the sympathetic state, right, for their own protection, right? Because that's also, part of the themes there is survival mode, right? In tribes, like we'd have people, some people do the night watch, right? Oh, so I can get like a really nice sleep. I don't have to worry about like also protecting myself while I'm sleeping, things of that nature, right? So then we just see that, people can get some deeper sleep. We also see this in like the animal kingdom, right? So Matthew Walker wrote a really nice book on sleep, right? Which I think kind of illustrates this point. And so I think it's pretty early in the book, but he talks about, sleep in different animal species and like kind of how they've developed. And, so for like monkeys and gorillas, for example, like the transition from sleeping into from trees into on the floor kind of poses its own issues, right? Which is like, well, I have if I'm sleeping in a tree, I have to kind of keep some of my brain alert so that I don't fall out, right? It's like, well, it's safer from most predators up in the tree, but yeah, if I fall out, like obviously that's an issue. So the brain's going to stay a little bit awake there. And then if we once we start to be, the shift into ground dwelling kind of poses its own thing. I don't have to worry about falling out, but now I'm more susceptible to ants and other big predators. Yeah. So we also see in humans is like sleeping in your own bed versus when you travel, right? So when you, even if it's the same time zone, but you're sleeping in a different bed, what we see is different neurologic activity. The brain is a little bit more alert in this new environment. So we tend to not, sleep quality takes a bit of a dip, right? And underlying that, it's like, well, we can kind of, it's like, is that safety? It's like, yeah, probably kind of new environments, right? Familiarity breeds, uncertainty kind of gives us more of a sense of safety, predictability. Again, kind of back to like the chaos versus like predictability idea, right? Those are two poles. So a new environment, a hotel even though it's comes with all of the amenities and whatever it might be, it's still new. So it still kind of like nudges us towards a sense of chaos. So even in these scenarios, and things like this, what we start to see is like kind of going through the same process. Like if I shift my nervous system into this state of coherence, I charge it with like again, favorable, uplifting emotions. Does that improve our sleep quality? I think the answer is yes. Yeah, yeah, kind of cool, I think.
Yeah, it makes sense, all of it, what you're saying. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's like why vacation, sometimes you get less sleep, right? Because you're not at home in bed, right? You expect like, oh, we get so much rest on this vacation, but sometimes it doesn't happen like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, um, but then back to what you were talking about earlier about the emotions, feeling the emotions, the heart coherence with the brain and the breathing, the 5 in, 5 out, and the emotional states. Um, yeah, I definitely experienced, that
Mhm.
for sure. And the difference between when you're in a good state to practice it versus when you're not, it's really hard to get into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Gratitude is easier than joy, but if you're struggling. Um,
Yeah.
Oh,
And
what was
when
the
it
other thing I
comes
was
to
gonna
these
say?
things, because yeah, maybe I'll say this and it might come to you. Uh, so with like these emotional states, like you don't have to like just take my word for it. Really, I encourage everyone to just explore. Like, yeah, try gratitude. That's been my experience. I think it's an easier one to tap into. And then it's kind of like adjacent to some of these other states, right? To go from gratitude to curiosity or gratitude to joy might kind of be like an easier transition. Um, Self-generated emotions is like, I mean, I think it's huge. I think it's absolutely huge. You know, when we think about our decision making, like the reason that we do things, it's usually either to feel something or not feel something, right? I think that's at the foundation of like our actions and behaviors. If we really kind of peel back the layers, right? If we really look at the cause, it's usually to feel something or not feel something. And really, both things are happening simultaneously, right? Because if I seek out this one feeling, then it means I don't have to feel this other thing, right?
Yeah,
And feelings like these emotions are kind of can often be subtle. We even see it like in like sales, like when we make a purchase, right? We actually decide emotionally and then we
mhm.
justify it logically kind of after the fact. Um,
um,
yeah.
yeah. Self-generated emotions was the other thing. So I remember when I was younger, I was really good at it. Um, like I would generate emotions to motivate myself. Usually it was love. So like when I was like in high school, study really hard, do my homework, because I wanted my parents not to suffer. So I would like generate this emotion that would give me energy. Then when I moved in with my aunt after Katrina, I would still have that skill. I was still good at it, and I generate emotions about. Most of the time I was trying to make things easier for other people and it would give me this energy. Um, and then I told you in the past, like when I'd go to work out, I would generate anger so I could work out super hard, you know?
Yes.
And I flip-flop between those two. And sometimes I would generate anger if I was exhausted and it was like midnight and I'm still doing homework. And this is when I was younger.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely, but but now being with you, it feels like an opportunity to relearn how to do that because for a long time I kind of just like everything got kind of numb and dulled, and the ability to do that and just trying to like survive basically, just trying to survive and get by, you know? But now that things are a little bit, I guess I could say safer for me, I think yeah, I could kind of start feeling it, like the ability to start generating emotions. Well, it's coming back little bit by little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
That's very
know?
cool.
S- So I think it's an important thing. And then yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anger can be a really powerful fuel source, especially if we're just trying to get off the launch pad.
Yeah, but it doesn't last.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you
Yeah.
ask 100 people if you want that to be your like primary fuel source for the rest of your life,
I
I don't think
know,
anybody's
man.
gonna be like, yeah,
Ah,
I don't want to be the Hulk 24/7.
yeah, man. Yeah, so for sure.
Yeah.
And
So
that whole electromagnetic wave, I absolutely think it's true just because I've told you about the lights.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like how our body, right? It's a two-way thing, right? We're
E-
interacting with our environment, it's interacting with us.
Even my fish, dude. Like if I go in that room and I'm angry, they all hide. But
Mm,
if I go in there and I'm
yeah.
calm, they all come to the glass and they're all looking at me and I'm like, this is the weirdest thing. Like I've started noticing that. Like they're like a mood ring. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. So, again, I think, a lot of us kind of came from like, well, it's like this is a little woo-woo, but most of us have had this experience. Like you come into a room, nothing is said, but you're like, did something just happen, just moments ago?
Yeah.
Like just reading the room and this, you know, millions of years of evolution of this, basically same type of nervous system. The stuff that we're talking about today is like, it's true for all of our ancestors. It's also true for a lot of the animal kingdom, right? So they're doing like this same thing where we can communicate outside of language, right? Outside of body language, even, right? We can be facing off
Yeah.
opposite directions, not looking at each other, but we can still detect this stuff, this
Yeah.
interaction with our electromagnetic fields. So even from the science, physics perspective, like there's stuff happening here. Um, and yes, again, it can be a little bit more subtle because we're talking about it at the heart, at the body level. So we all
Yeah.
have this, and it's just the case that, maybe we did just kind of like get so moved up into our heads, right? Where it's like I logic my way through things, right? I see things and then I try to process it at this level. But there's so much happening here. Again, speaking to the magnitude and intensity of the heart. Um, yeah, so like the fish that you mentioned, it's like that's a great example. I love that. Um,
It's strange,
but
dude. It's really
yeah,
interesting.
but yeah, people that we yeah just interact with, like you're just in a room or like you walk into the doctor's office and you're in the lobby, not too far from people, like we're picking up and putting down, um, these subtle energetic experiences, these little nudges, right? And I think it also, on the flip side of it, it's just like, hey, when people are like, right, we're kind of in sync and we're finishing each other's sandwiches. Um, did you see what was it, Frozen?
Frozen?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I couldn't help myself. But when you're in sync, I think it really points to like this, it's like a group coherence. So a lot of this work that I'm referencing here comes from a group called Heart Math. And that's what
Hmm.
they're looking at. They're using the electrodes here, electrodes on the brain, and they're seeing like, well, when we breathe this way, when we change our attention, like, okay, things start to line up. And then the same thing can happen for multiple people, right? So, I think we've all had the experience like, wow, we're really driving. And then we just use this like poetry, like, oh, we're kind of in sync, or like we're on the same wavelength. But there's some like literal aspects of that. It's like if we did have the technology to look at on a screen and be like, oh yeah, we're like our wavelengths are synced up, and here's our experience. I think like we would tend to see more of this like, yeah, like the conversation is good, and we're talking about things that are like heartfelt and so forth. um, and then this can actually begin to expand into group settings as well, right? So if you think about group interactions that you had like where it felt really good. Maybe we're like having the powwow around the campfire and like we're just like talking story, singing songs, whatever it might be, and we're driving really well versus like a company meeting where like, oh, we know something bad is going to be said or like they're like they have to, share some unfortunate news.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of this. Like you can just sense it. Um,
That makes me think of something too, like with friends, like, if you can only be around these people when you're drunk. Yeah, that's, people, somebody say, are they really your friends? But that's probably like a heart coherence thing too, like, okay, if
Mhm.
you're, if you're, everybody's heart's out of coherence, I think, when they're drunk, then you're all together. Okay, yeah, but when like you're not in that state, you know what I mean? And you're like, body's like, whoa, dude, dude, they don't vibe with me. Like, why are you with them?
Mhm.
It's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, we know that. So I think on one level, so to the point of alcohol, right, it's kind of like the shutting down of the prefrontal cortex. I often
Yeah.
go like this, right? Because it kind of, evolutionarily, it's just like here's reptiles in our Labrador Retriever, monkey brain, and then, child development, teenager, adult brain, in the prefrontal cortex, like very logical and so forth.
Yeah.
So it's not so much that alcohol is like so specific to like certain spots, but it definitely starts to dysregulate or not, it shuts down, right? We see less
Yeah.
activity in the logical adult prefrontal cortex. So um, so in some ways, I think it's a bit of an amplifier, right? Which is just like if someone was heavily reliant on using their prefrontal cortex to really kind of hold things down, it's like the
Yeah.
CEO of a company trying to do everybody's job,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? They're like micromanaging everything versus the CEO who's like, oh yeah, I kind of just like little nudge here, little like plant a seed of advice for this group, like really soft nudges where because the rest of the operation is like moving smoothly. Because if the heart's in coherence with the rest of the brain, then the prefrontal
Hmm.
cortex just has to be like, its job is just going to be a lot easier. It just has to do less. Little nudges, little nudges. Um, but if this is so dysregulated, like the prefrontal cortex is like trying its best to just hold down the fort. It has to do a lot of work.
Yeah.
It has to do a lot of work. So then bring alcohol into the mix. Prefrontal cortex is just disenfranchised, has less autonomy, and everything else just gets to like now run rampant. So, people have different experiences, of course, like on alcohol, right? Some
Yeah.
people are super bubbly and friendly and they just want to hug everyone, right? They're like, let's get to the part where we just like have a heart to heart and we cry together. Like, I have some friends like that. But then I also had, well, used acquaintances from back when
Yeah.
who get in fights,
Yeah.
right? It's like every time we go out and they drink a little too much, like they're gonna pick a fight with somebody.
Yeah. To make sure like what was going on in there, like what was really going on, the depths of
Yeah,
everything.
exactly. And so we can, yeah, we can think about the prefrontal cortex as like, again, it was like holding down the fort. It's like, well, we have this thing kind of bubbling up, and the prefrontal cortex was like, no. So it's like the I am calm, I am not someone who needs a fight with somebody. But the body was like, something was bubbling up. Anger,
Yeah.
frustration, whatever the need was to like duke it out with the biggest person in the room that was a stranger, like they didn't even know before walking into this room.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there, is it amplification or is it suppression? It's like however you want to think about it. It's kind of like the that analogy of, we feed the fish and the hungriest fish is just like going to come to the surface and get the food, right away.
Yeah.
Right.
E-
And so if that emotion was like,
Yeah.
oh, we were really kind of like anger was bubbling up, but we kind of just used again our prefrontal cortex to like, you know, I am calm, I am calm, I am calm. Not only is that like very effortful, right? As soon as that is under resourced, right? Doesn't have enough energy to do that anymore, then it just the bottle top pops off, right? And
Yeah.
it becomes like a
Like
fire, like a you know the fire hose.
this this morning, okay, so I told you I've been kind of sleep deprived. I've been. And then I was walking downstairs. I was like, I'm exhausted. I was like, dude, you've been thinking this thought all morning. I'm exhausted. Like, just change your thought. You won't feel exhausted. Like, and I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm okay. I'm good. And I was like, all right, but I could feel myself suppressing what my heart was saying. It's like, dude, you're tired, you need rest, whatever. And I'm like, okay, and I'm gonna turn on Spotify, and this has happened so many times. I click, and I just hit like shuffle, and then the emo song from when we were younger, like I'm not okay, is what came on, and I was like, oh my God, okay, you're right, I'm not okay. I just lied to myself, you know. So I kind
Yeah.
of just belted that song out, and I was like, all right, is this better? I was like, universe, is this better? I admit it, I'm not okay. You know?
Yeah.
But it's kind of weird. Like, it's like there was a interaction between might have been electromagnetic because it was my heart and a device. I don't know. But
Yeah.
it's pretty strange. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm okay. And then my phone's like, no, dude, you're not.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. Sometimes I like to think my heart picks the playlist, if it's on shuffle.
Yeah.
Um, uh, yeah, I'm not okay, and that's okay. Um,
Yeah.
right. That's just
So
our ascribing meaning to the sensation that we have. Right. It's like, oh, this emotion is not okay, or like whatever that means. I'm not okay, meaning like I have a whole bunch of the not down regulating, the not uplifting emotions.
yeah.
I'm not
And I guess
okay.
what
I have all this stuff.
yeah.
It's like, well, that's why I say I'm like, I'm not okay, but I'm okay. Like it's okay
Yeah.
to have those, right? So
Yeah.
it just is what it is.
And and after that, my brain and heart definitely felt more incoherence. Like I could feel old habit, like kind of just, stay in the head, just, pull it out of coherence. You're fine, whatever. But then after it was like, all right, I can feel exhausted
Yeah.
and be like, I can have these feelings, but I can still be like one person,
Hmm.
like be one, you know what I mean? Instead of like, no, 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 just push it in a box,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah, the emotional suppression, right? The lack of being in coherence for days and weeks and months and years, it does build up in the body, right? So this kind of points
Yeah.
to like this classic, the body keeps the score idea of
Hmm.
like it gets stored somewhere. It literally gets stored somewhere. And it's usually in muscles, right? So, certain emotions kind of have these positions and postures like we talked about. And then so it tends to go into like a little bit of specificity in the certain areas of the body, muscles. And then what we're also seeing recently is like the connective tissue, the fascia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it gets stored in there. And then so as we begin to create this environment of safety, right? We go through this process that we talked about. We enter coherence and we create an environment for the emotions to kind of move through.
Yeah.
Right. So not exactly the three steps that we talked about today, because it could just be like it could be do the attention shifting, right? Move your attention, shine the spotlight on different areas, get into a state of coherence using our breathing, and then just allow things to pop up. That's another path. This one's um it is a little bit tougher in some ways, right? Just like to hold space for these emotions. Or like we're feeding the fish and then something's going to come up, right?
Yeah.
Right. Expect that to happen, right? You're like, I have this intention of feeling joy, but now I'm like angry all of a sudden, right? Because it could be the case that like you're feeding the fish and then joy got fed, but there are other
Yeah.
fish that are really hungry. And so now anger is coming up and it's like, hey, here's this, like I've been starving for weeks or months, years. And so it's going to start eating. You're like, where's all this anger coming from? It's like, well, we kind of just keep feeding it. Like we just hold space for it, right? Keep breathing into coherence. You can shift your attention still, right? Because it's going to be a felt sense, right? It's going to pull your attention to one spot, right? Oh, I feel anger in my chest. You're like, but do I feel it in my hand? Like, possibly, right? But I can shift my attention there, come back, right? Like in the same way that we talked about pain, right? Our attention goes to the pain. It keeps pulling me in this direction, and then I try to like do my best to, right? It's like you can go there, spend a little bit of time, watch how it moves and behaves as we hold space for it. but then shift it to other areas. So anger is really no different in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's we talk about joy quite a bit, and I think each emotion has its own flavor. Um, Joe Hudson, who is one of the like, as far as I can tell, like one of the preeminent thinkers and speakers on emotions right now, especially in the coaching space on emotions. He says that joy is the matriarch of the family, and it won't enter a house where her children aren't welcome. So what that kind of points to is that if we don't allow ourselves to feel anger, to feel sad, right? To feel the anxiety, joy is gonna stay kind of it's gonna be stay out of the house, right? We won't get to experience joy. So for that reason, it's like, well, after we kind of feed the, I know we're like mixing analogies, but after you feed the other fish, right, the ones we just mentioned, it's like then joy comes up to the surface, and you're like, oh, now I experience joy, I experience happiness and these things. Um, Joy also has um, Joe Hudson also kind of talks to this point, like it has a shorter lifespan, like because he does these like extensive retreats, these workshops and retreats. And so, you know, when he's like, okay, we're going to basically do anger, like we're gonna be like an actor, we're gonna be allow ourselves to like just express and move anger. And then people will do that for like 45 minutes. Like it kind of just like keeps on going like on and on and on and on. And then they've moved it, they held space for it, allowed it to process. Good. And then when they do joy, pleasure, like 5 minutes or so, and they're like, okay, what's next? Like it doesn't last as long when we like do joy. Like kind of like we move through it. Um, Kind of unfortunate, it seems like, but that is just the nature of things. Maybe everyone's probably a little different, both from your own past karma and experiences and where if you had a stressful week or month or year coming into this practice, this moment. Um, but probably disposition a little bit as well. So a lot of commonalities, I think, across all individuals, but then just different like dials, like everyone's going to be a little bit different in how that's expressed. Um, to the point of sadness, I'll kind of share. I just listened to it again. Joe sharing his experience basically when he was younger. He got made fun of for crying, and so they like threw him a pity party. They took a photo of him crying, put it in an album. His parents didn't like him crying, and so this was like when he was, somewhere around like 8 or 10 years old. And so for like 14 years or so, up and through like college and into his early 20s, he didn't cry at all. And then it took him a long time to be able to release that valve for him to cry again. And so what he did was he'd go out into the woods, kind of be, pretend he's an actor. And it's like, let's pretend like we're crying and see if, real tears will come out. And he couldn't do it for years. And then when it finally did happen and like the flow of sadness came through and he was able to cry, he's like, yeah, I cried for like 4 days straight. And it was amazing. It was awesome. And then, all the things that were associated with his lack of ability to feel, to allow sadness to move through him, then kind of manifested in, other areas of his life. So um, there's kind of like this direct connection of like where sadness isn't allowed to be felt in certain aspects of his life. Moving the sadness then just kind of makes this specific aspect of his life a lot easier. Yeah. So pretty cool. The emotional level stuff is I think very compelling. Again, pointing to this like our actions, our behavior is largely sitting atop our feelings, our emotions. It's like that's how we decide things. So it shapes our behavior, right? And of course, this kind of points to the upstream effects that we talked about, emotions, thoughts, actions, behaviors. Cool. I could go on and on about this stuff. It is one of my favorite topics right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm about to go get some lunch soon. So, but
Say it again.
I'm gonna have to get some lunch soon. So I'm starting to
Okay.
get hungry.
Yeah, good. We can
But
end it here.
I emotions.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments on the topic?
No. Uh-uh.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Very good.